Hello, everyone. It is also Monday. It is the first Monday of December, which means we are just a month away from 2025. And what a perfect time to have this conversation around finding purpose. I'm excited. My name is Sandra Garcia, and I play a dual role here. I'm the program manager for the New York Urban League, our Equity Innovation Lab, and I'm also a coach with C-Suite Coach. And I'm excited. This series this year has been amazing, and we get to wrap it up today. But there is so much more to come in 2025. This year, we hosted 4 sessions, and in the new year, we plan to bring you more. We are going to introduce the series with a greater cadence, and we also plan to increase the number to 6. So please be on the lookout for so much more. We may even send you a recap of what we did this year. So I will go ahead and pass things on to Angelina Darrisaw, who is the founder and also the CEO of C-Suite Coach, and she will be your moderator for today. Angelina, please take it from here.
Thank you so much, Sandy. And hi, everyone. I'm really excited to be here with you today, and especially for this conversation. Once again, I'm Angelina Darrisaw, and I'm the founder and CEO of C-Suite Coach. We are an organizational development consultancy, almost a decade old, and we have had the great privilege of working with some of the world's largest and most exciting organizations, from the Googles and Sephoras of the world to major global nonprofits. And I have a very exciting conversation ahead of us today. We are live streaming, which means normally we would have the opportunity to see your comments in the chat. While we can't see that today, what we can do is see your Q&A. So if there are things that are top of mind for you that you want us to address, please do make sure you use the Q&A function in the live stream so we can make sure we answer your questions as well. We want this to be a space for you. And again, thank you to the New York Urban League for hosting this series with us. Very excited for what we have in store in 2025. As for today, what we have in store is a conversation about finding purpose in your position. It can sometimes feel we're moving through life, we're moving through roles. And actually, when I first had a conversation with one of our panelists in our very first conversation, we talked about how we spend about 1/3 of our lives at work. And that is a significant amount of time. And as we're spending time in these spaces, how do we make sure that we also make that time feel fulfilling and meaningful for us? And we launched into a conversation like this, and I said, wait, this is too good. I want to have it with all of you. And so joining us today, we do have one of our executive coaches at C-Suite Coach, Karina Schneider, who is a global people and culture leader and coach, having spent most of her career contributing to business impact across the consulting, healthcare, and nonprofit sectors. Her work portfolio has included Asia, Europe, United States, and Central America, and she supports organizations navigate the complexities of the modern workplace to foster sustainable health and performance. And she's joining us from across the globe. So thank you so much for being here today from Switzerland, Karina.
Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to our conversation today.
And I'm really excited about our panelists on the corporate side. We have someone who I have had the privilege of knowing for a very long time and really watched her career from afar and been inspired and impressed and seen, at least from what the outside looking in looks like, is a lot of purpose in the moves that she's made and in the work that she's done. And that is none other than Jeanne Adams, who is a senior director of DEI, CSR, and internal communications at Christian Dior Couture. I saw some amazing new collaborations with some wonderful artists that I was excited about. So love to see that. Previously, she held leadership roles at Morgan Stanley, including Chief of Staff to Global Head of Talent and VP of Diversity and Inclusion, with a strong background in social work, including 9+ years at Year Up. Jeanne is dedicated to fostering opportunities for underrepresented groups. She serves on the boards of Youth Represent and the Howard University School of Social Work, and is actually a Howard grad as well, with an MSW from Howard and a BA from Spelman College. Welcome, Jeanne.
Thanks for having me.
All right. So to open it up, the first thing I want to hear from each of you is tell me about a time when we think about this theme, finding purpose in your position. Tell me about a time where there was a position you held where you felt really connected to the purpose, or alternatively, if you had to go about a process of connecting to the purpose and actually finding that purpose where you were. Jeannie, I'll let you kick it off.
Yeah. So, as Angelina mentioned in my bio, my background's in social work, social worker at Christian Dior. I don't know. I wouldn't have like put those pieces together. But I knew from a child that I wanted to work with people. My whole family, they're like do-gooder types. They're community activists. They're foster moms and dads. They're adoptive parents. They work at community organizations. My grandmother was a midwife. So naturally, or so I thought, that's the direction that I want to go in. I went to school for psychology, went to grad school for social work. My brother went to Howard for social work as well. So I kind of created a similar path that he had. And I knew I wanted to do that. I knew I wanted to be a therapist. I did it. And then it was like, now what? I had done it for like 6 years, and the organization that I was working with was going through some transition. So I was like, well, seems like a good time for me to go through my own transition, which is how I lucked up on Year Up, which I would say really helped me to figure out who I could be. Since I had checked the box of being that therapist, that I knew that kind of was crafted through my family upbringing, but then going to college and kind of, having your own experiences, you figure other things out, or you see that there's much more out there than what you thought when you were growing up. And Year Up exposed me to the corporate side of work. I was doing direct service social work, but then I was working with corporations, especially on the tech side. And I'm thinking, I feel like a fraud in a way, because I'm working with young people who we're preparing to go into corporate, and I've never stepped foot in a corporate office before. So what am I doing? But I kept telling people that one day I think I want to go into corporate. One day I want to do that. And Year Up gave me that exposure, and it helped me to get to Morgan Stanley. It helped me to get to Christian Dior. And so my purpose, while I think my purpose always had been helping people, connecting with people, from being a direct service social worker to going to this nonprofit that worked with corporations, to actually working at the 2 corporations that I've had the pleasure of, exploring and continuing to develop my own professional career. That's the thing that's connected all of those for me. And I've stayed true to that, no matter the company or the industry.
Karina?
Thanks for sharing, Jeannie, your story. And I think we have one thing in common around this sense of purpose around helping people, although it shows up in different ways. Mm-hmm. And I started my career in learning and development, and I've always enjoyed and got a lot of energy out of conversations with individuals where we facilitate their own self-awareness and their ability to learn and grow in their careers. And as I grew in my career in HR, on hindsight, I realized as the years progressed, I did start to feel less and less connected as the job got bigger and the responsibilities got wider, that I was losing that connection of the one-to-one intimate conversations with individuals around their growth and their development. And it got to the point where I actually had to take a step back from the career I had built, because precisely of feeling rather disconnected to the sense of purpose. And ultimately now as a coach, being able to reconnect with it again and realizing this is where I get most energy. I don't need to do this all day, every day. It was like finding a needle in a haystack to say, what was it about my HR career that I loved and stayed on for so long? And it was really going back to helping individuals more than helping a bigger collective, that I felt the most purpose be expressed. And that's what led me here now to be an independent coach. And I work a lot in the well-being space, where the topic of purpose and meaning comes up quite often, especially in the last couple of years.
Thank you both for sharing your journeys and a bit of a glimpse into how you found purpose. What I found was a interesting thread, and what you both shared is it's been a journey, right? So I think a lot of times there is this perception that we arrive at the destination of purpose and fulfillment, and there is not a lot of grace given for the fact that it can take time to find where you're going. And then the other piece that you in particular shared, Jeannie, what that resonated with me was I can use these skills that I've gained and this passion I have in many different ways. And perhaps in doing that, that might be one way to find my purpose. Now, there was an article in the LA Times that reported 70% of employees say that their jobs define their sense of purpose. But there's also research that shows 12.5% of us, only 12.5% of us are actually totally and utterly engaged at work. So there's this conflict in we find our purpose in work, but it's not really engaging us according to some surveys. What do you think are some of the first steps that we could chase or begin to plan for if we're looking for that deeper sense of fulfillment in our roles? If you're connecting with someone who maybe is feeling disconnected or unfulfilled, what are some of those initial steps that they can take to rediscover that passion and find that purpose?
When I was practicing, I would say more direct service social work, and I had social work interns who would come to the organization. They knew exactly what they wanted to do. Most social workers, at least from my experience, wanted to be a therapist. When I was working at Year Up, it was not a therapeutic environment. It was more a generalist practice, but you used every bit of therapy skills, techniques in the day-to-day job, but you were not sitting there having a therapy session with someone. Over time, by the end of the internship, those same interns wanted the job at Year Up. And I said, no, you said you wanted to be a therapist and you had a reason why you wanted to do that. So I want to challenge you to go do that. And if the stars align, if there's opportunity, I want you to stay connected with me and come back because you were great at this. I would say yes to you immediately, but there was something that you wanted in that role. I think it's less about the job, helping to find our purpose, and we discovering the things that give us purpose, and then we use the job to act out on that, to do the behaviors, to execute on something related to that, to the job, and then it in turns, okay, I'm fulfilling the purpose. But I think it's so important to think way outside the organization because it's not the job, it's not the company, but it's you and the skills that you bring, the passion that you bring for something. What is that? So I would tell somebody to like really think back, even if you have to think back to when you were a kid, like what were those things that really brought you, like you were energized to do, or that you would naturally do without your parent fussing at you or your teacher hounding you down? What is that thing? And then connecting it to roles that allow you to do those jobs. Oftentimes, especially when you're straight out of college or it's your first career, you're not doing purpose-driven work. They have you doing the grunt work that isn't exciting, but something in that might keep you grounded and make you excited about continuing to do that work, not the company, but doing that kind of work. So really take a moment to reflect, jot down the things that you once thought were your thing, and reflect on that. And how does that play out in your day-to-day job today or in other spaces outside of your job? Because you may be doing it outside of work, and maybe it's time to think about where you are and how do you pivot into doing more of that particular work.
That's great, Jeannie. And what you shared brought me back to when I was in high school, and I knew that I wanted to do work that had some element of social justice embedded in it. But the only exposure and access I had to what social justice looked like was Amnesty International or the Peace Corps. And I felt that if I wanted to make positive change in the world, I had to do one of those things. And it really took a lot of work thinking expansively to recognize that you could have impact in spaces without directly being on front lines, and that there needs to be policymakers, decision makers, business owners, corporate influencers doing that work on the inside for change to happen as well. So I love the idea of thinking about how to be expansive in recognizing ways to bring your talent to the forefront. Karina, any thoughts there on some of the steps that we could take to begin to redefine or even find for ourselves, if we've never discovered it, what that purpose might be?
Yeah, I want to just briefly react to what you both shared, which is to not make the assumption that our organizations have to be completely 100% aligned to our purpose, but rather using the organization and the job as a way to facilitate our expression of purpose. And I really, really appreciate that point, because often we get stuck in that assumption that there has to be 100% alignment. And that's a luxury, right? Great if you have that, but not everybody gets to have that. I think the other thing that maybe like two thoughts around the steps to get closer to it is, one, finding your purpose, as you said, Angelina, is a journey, and it needs to be inspiring. It needs to be fun. It needs to be playful. It needs to be something that allows us to be adventurous and curious, and not something that stresses us out or makes us feel like if we haven't figured it out, we're less than. And I find sometimes there's a lot of pressure to feel like we've figured it out and we're 100% living out our purpose. And we know that the world is so volatile and complex, and it might not always play out the way we imagined it to be. So I always just encourage a playful and curious approach to trusting the process of figuring it out. And how do we do that? It's really going back to what brings us joy, what brings us energy, what do the people around us appreciate about who we are and what we do, and just starting and using those as hints and little clues to help us find the way. Like they're breadcrumbs that we can follow until we discover that process. But it is a journey, and it will change. What we might think our purpose is today might change in a couple of years, and that's okay too. So I think just like giving ourselves a little bit of space and breathing room to discover what that is.
And Karina, I'm glad that you hit on this word luxury, because what stands out to me when I hear that, it brings me back to a TEDx talk I did in 2017, where I talked about career advancement as a social justice issue. And one of the big challenges is for many people from historically marginalized groups, that ability to have a fulfilling career really is a luxury. And it seems like something that many of us can't afford. Both of you, I think, have the right experience to speak to this. What happens, and how does one go about finding a purpose and finding purpose in your career when it feels like I have to keep these jobs because financially I don't have alternatives? I have to keep these jobs because I don't have intergenerational wealth, and I need to do the things to set my family up or even to keep myself in survival. How can we also find purpose when that's the space that we're in? What are the steps that we take when we're coming from that space?
I'm happy to give it a first shot. And I like the word that you used, Angelina, about being expansive. And I think if we remind ourselves that there are many aspects to our lives than work. So work is a slice of it. And if our work is not the biggest source of purpose or fulfillment for us, but it gives us what we need to have a decent life for ourselves and for the people we care about, like financial security, how do we use that comfort and relief to give us energy to then use in other spaces of our lives where we can express our purpose? And I deeply believe that there are other ways to do that, whether it's caring for our families or finding some vocational or voluntary work outside of the job that pays us, that can still be avenues that our purpose can be expressed. So that's one thing I would offer.
I agree with you, Karina. It's funny. I know people who are privileged to work in certain industries or have careers where they make a lot of money and they're still not fulfilled. And so the amount of money, I'm a believer that the amount of money you make, while it can buy you things and give you access to certain things, if internally you're still not there, then you have not won. You have not won. And unfortunately, our society puts a lot of value on that number, and how much someone makes and the status that they have. And so, you know, it's so important to what you said. If you can't have access to that type of job to make that certain amount of money, there is still so much value in utilizing your gifts, your strengths in other spaces and places that add value to that company or that person or whatever the circumstance may be. But it's so important to do that if you can. I think each of us has some opportunity to make an impact. And once you recognize that you did make that impact, you can keep doing that again. The other part of it is, I think it's so important to utilize the network that you have and continue to build your network, because you don't know who, if you say one thing to someone, what door could potentially open for you. I feel like I'm a product of that because my path wasn't necessarily in this direction. And it was because I started talking to people and saying things, and I landed this opportunity after having a conversation with someone at a random event. And that person said, I wasn't even going to that event. And here we are. Now we get to work together. And so while you may be in a certain position today, continue to talk to people, to continue to engage, continue to care about what you do and what, you know, really drives you, and share that with the world, because someone's going to see it and say, hey, I have an opportunity for you. And that could be, you know, a world of difference.
So what I'm hearing is, even if you don't have the opportunity to be in that purpose-driven position right now, spend the time to know what your purpose is and then start communicating that as broadly as possible. And that will help craft a path for you to get there.
Absolutely. I'm a believer that, you know, people come and go intentionally. And when they're there with you, there's a reason. So figure that out, utilize them for that time. Or maybe you're giving them something, whatever it is, like utilize the people that you are around, the circumstances in which you're in, and see where that can take you. Be open to the opportunity, because it may not look exactly how you thought it would look. But be curious. Back to your curiosity, the point about being curious, be curious, at least explore it and say, maybe that is a direction I can take, or maybe not now, but that's something I should keep in the back of my mind.
Wow. So we have about 4 gems for y'all already. I'm just going to review them really quick so you all don't lose them. The first is that Jeanne started us off with, was start to think back to those things that brought you joy early on in your life. What drove your curiosity? That could be a good stepping stone to beginning to figure out what can bring you joy, what can bring you meaning and purpose now. Karina talked about the importance of us thinking expansively around ways in which we could tap into our purpose. Also recognizing that work is just a piece of life. So purpose can extend outside of the position we're in at work, but in the positions we fill in other elements of our life. And then from Jeanne, we also just heard the importance of, when you figure out what that purpose is, communicate it as broadly as possible. Thank you all for that. I'm taking notes. And now, Karina, executive coach, I have to ask you this ICF question, because ICF found that a strong correlation, and that's the International Coaching Federation, by the way, found a strong correlation between coaching and increased employee engagement, with 72% of respondents in a 2023 study acknowledging this relationship. Since engagement and purpose can be linked, it's reasonable to infer that coaching can contribute to a greater sense of purpose. Many professionals still struggle to identify the root cause of their feelings of disconnection with their current roles. What can executive coaching do to help individuals uncover underlying beliefs or patterns that might be hindering their ability to feel that they're in their purpose and their roles, and hopefully engage more in their roles too?
Yeah. And that's, I think that's what we want for the world, right? We want people to be engaged in the work that we do, and that's how, the biggest issues we have in the world can be solved at the end of the day. And I think going back to the question on how coaching can help, what I appreciate about the coaching relationship is that it offers individuals a space where they can take a step back and zoom out and look at their challenges from a distance, and with our ability as coaches to sometimes ask the difficult but powerful questions to really reflect on what might be going on in their lives, because they're too close to the situation sometimes to be able to see it. And some of the questions I would ask would be like, how is this sense of disconnect showing up? Or asking the inverse question, which is, when did you last feel connected to your job? And when did you last feel joyful or energized or alive in your work? And as we ask those questions, we start to uncover what might be going on and what has changed in the meantime. And sometimes it's not necessarily about the job itself. It could be that there's something else going on in their lives that might be pulling them energetically away from their work. Or it could be that they absolutely love their job, but they're at the point of chronic stress where they've stopped enjoying it, right? Or we realize that perhaps something in our value system has changed. And that happens a lot as we evolve in our lives, or our life circumstances change. What we thought we valued or prioritized can change too. So I think as we go through questions like that, we start to uncover what might be causing the disconnect. And the beauty with coaching is once you have that sense of clarity and awareness, now we have something to work with, right? And something we can then help our clients move forward with that type of information. So those are some of the things I think presents us opportunities when we use coaching as an intervention.
Thank you. And that's really powerful. When you talk about burnout, it just made me think I'm fresh coming back from a vacation for a couple of days, and I spent one of the days with my phone completely just off. Mm-hmm. And I realized I was at that moment where I was just like, oh, I need a break. But my purpose always drives me back to it. Can you either of you just think about a time in your career where you were on the edge and you're like, oh, I'm burning out, or maybe it's a client you dealt with, Karina, and the purpose has been something that has helped carry through and help them figure out how to find well-being in the midst of that stress so that they can move that purpose forward?
Yeah. I'm happy to start. I mean, I certainly went through it myself too. So I did, part of why I had to take a step back from my career was because I really felt that the lack of connection led to burnout over time. But I can specifically think as well of a client who loved the work of just developing software, right? That was part of the reason why they joined the organization. There was a lot of purpose into it. But over time, their job evolved to include a lot of client-facing work, which was not playing to their strengths. It was taking time away from what they loved doing, and it was draining their energy to the point that their well-being suffered because it was a high-stress job that they were not doing well enough, and they didn't enjoy either. And through the work that we did together, it was a process to admit that, yes, there is a part of this job I do not want to do. And if I continue to keep doing it as much as it gives me status and pay, it's not sustainable over time. And you often hear stories of individuals who burnt out and are unable to go back to their previous organizations. And what I love about this client story is they did manage to go back to their organizations, recontract the work, and just be okay with, this is the part of the job that I love to do, and this is all I want to do. I don't need anything more. And it takes a lot of awareness and humility to be able to express that to themselves, but also to the people around them, to say, this is the type of job I want. And thankfully, you also have organizations who are willing to accommodate and who actually appreciate people being honest about what they can bring into their jobs. And that to me is a really important story. I have to remind myself of sometimes, that it's okay to be honest about, what we want to do and what we don't want to do. And hopefully you're connected with organizations who can support that as well.
I think that person was quite fortunate to work at an organization like that, because that isn't always the case. I know someone close to me who probably one of the more passionate people that I know, particularly when it comes to their work. And she would laugh at me and say, "Jeannie, you don't seem like you're that this is as important to you." I said, no, it's as important to me, but I'm not letting this consume me. But it was so like it was the job that defined them versus she defining the job. Eventually, after coaching and friends really giving her the real deal, she was able to see that in herself. Like, wow, I've allowed the job to like take control of me, and I need to take control of my own life back. And you mentioned earlier, Karina, the connection between work and just you as a person, how closely they're connected. And that was what was happening. And it was much more than just work. It was life. And it's great to see this person like finding themselves beyond the job that they had, and seeing that they're much more valued than the job that they're in. There's so much more to that, and they can bring so much to others, maybe another organization, but not being so defined by that job.
And so what I'm hearing is that it's not just about purpose, but it's also about priorities and being able to voice that and to speak to the companies that you work with around what are the elements of work that are really important to you to be a part of the role. One thing that I will add that helps me stay connected as well is looking at the bigger picture. And so a lot of times I call it eating your vegetables, right? I'm a vegetarian. I actually love vegetables, most of them. But I know that when I was younger, sometimes, I wanted to eat the breads and the sweets, and your parents want you to eat your vegetables. But the vegetables are what gives you that sustenance, right? And so as a CEO, for example, often I have to do a lot of administrative work, a lot of operations, a lot of people management. And that's not why I started an organizational development consultancy. But when I look at the bigger picture of the impact that we're making, it reminds me how necessary that work is. And that helps me stay focused when I'm at that point of almost burnout. So I appreciate you all also sharing some examples. Now, something else I wanted to touch on is there was a study that found that purpose-oriented employees are 54% more likely to stay in a role for 5 years or more. And that is something that companies really struggle with, right? Is retention and making sure that they're also maximizing relationships with talent. So the same group, if you're more purpose-oriented, you're also 30% more likely to be a high performer. Our values play a role in how we perceive work and how more fulfilling it is for us, how much impact we can have. How would you recommend individuals go about identifying those core values, what they are, and then how do we align them with our professional goals to really enhance that sense of purpose? And what can companies do to also facilitate this for their employees? Because companies want their employees to perform better and be more engaged and stay longer.
I would say I'm learning a lot from, I would say, the younger workforce, because I think they come in demanding more from companies, and I appreciate their boldness because I was not that person coming out of school or jumping. I would say even more recent career shifts I've had, I'm just now becoming bold and saying what it is that I want. And so that speaks to, I think, that particular generation that expects, certain things. They expect certain. I've been interviewing, helping our campus team on campus recruitment sessions. And they had never had someone in DEI show up at one of those because I'm the first person in DEI. But it's interesting because it does not matter the makeup of the group at all. They're asking the question. They're like, so what does DEI actually mean? And how does it show up? What's the impact that you've had? Or what about wellness? And how is that, what does that mean in your organization? How does that show up? And so find the things that are important to you and interview the hell out of that organization. You are interviewing them. It's cliche. You're interviewing them just like they're interviewing you. And if there are red flags that come up, stay clear of those red flags. If it feels good, stay clear, like really lean into that and ask more questions, bring back that curiosity, to ensure that they're not just talking the talk, but there are actions, there are visible things that you've seen that organization or that manager. One question and even like to the direct manager, there was a question that someone said is a great question to ask, and it's about that person mentoring someone. And what's been your greatest mentorship accomplishment? Because you want to know, how has that person managed or helped someone else other than themselves? And so making sure you're interviewing the people you're meeting, the organization, and doing your research on them to see if those are things that are important to you. So maybe you haven't figured out your core values just yet. What do you go back to? What resonates for you? What do you see yourself leaning into outside of the day-to-day work, but in your natural state of just being with your friends and your family? What comes up? Those begin to craft your core values. And then while an organization may not have the exact wording or language that your core values, how it shows up in that company and how it lands for you in hearing it or reacting to something they've done is what you want to feed into. But do the interview. Don't just go off of the surface and believe what's just written out there. You want to know exactly what's happening.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. And I think that goes back to that point about how much time we spend at work. And sometimes we're seeing our colleagues and our coworkers more than we're seeing our families that we live at home with. And so it is important that we take that approach. That's something I do also admire about Gen Zs and some of the more assertive millennials is coming in the gate, right? Really looking at this as a matchmaking process as opposed to just straight up they're picking you process and looking for that right fit. Thank you for that. Yeah. Karina, anything else you think companies can do to help foster that sense of meaning or that sense of impact for their employees?
Yeah, I think one of the things, again, going back to the principle we started with, which is use the job and the organization as a way to facilitate a person's expression of purpose. I think it's a lot more we can do as leaders to actually have those conversations with our teams and our employees to really ask what drives them, what gives them energy, why do they want to work for this organization in the first place, and regularly check how much of that initial excitement is actually playing out in reality, because it is in an organization's interest to want their employees to be excited and energized by the work that they do. And for leaders who truly do pay attention, once you start to see that fluctuations are normal, but if you start to see a pattern where the excitement and enthusiasm is waning over time, there's an opportunity to have that conversation to say, what's getting in the way of you continuing to be excited about work and how can we change that? And a lot of these things don't have to cost so much time or resources to do. It's just having those regular conversations and checking in, as often as reasonably can to ensure our employees stay engaged, especially when we know many organizations now work hybrid, people work remote. You don't have that type of connection with people in person as we used to. So I think there's a greater sense of importance to staying close to our employees and staying connected.
And Karina, if I could add, those questions you proposed, it's important to ask yourself those questions too. Hopefully you can recognize if your baseline is here and you're like moving in a different either or direction, it's important to recognize, well, why is it, and how long has it been that way? So it's as much your responsibility to check in with yourself as I would hope managers are checking in with people. That's a whole other conversation. But yes, to your point, hopefully managers are doing that, but definitely do it for yourself.
Absolutely.
That's such a great call out. And I do see one question in the chat. Please keep those questions coming in the chat. I will ask those in just a moment. And what you called out, Karina, was a reminder for me for leaders, and something that I'm always reminding myself as well is reinforcing what people were excited about when they start. How can you find ways to reinforce that into their experience? And I'll give a quick example that I'm also seeing with many of my clients who are doing DEI work in the wake of many changes that are happening at national levels. There's a lot of change of language at many organizations. And this has made some employees maybe feel, well, are we still going to be able to walk the walk? Am I still going to be able to do the work I care about? And it's been really important. The great examples of leadership that I've seen have been those leaders that are able to say, listen, the language may change, the words may change, but the work is still being done. And really being able to keep the vision clear and keep the vision plain and being transparent about that. So that's one piece. Now, another question I have for you, Karina, and I'll ask you all two more questions, then get to questions in the chat. So please keep those coming in. Another question I have for you brings me back to long time ago, maybe about a decade ago. I used to do some individual coaching, and I had a client who was a nonprofit leader, senior director, was on the path to becoming an executive director, and hired a coach for that reason. And in our very first session, we're talking about some of these things, core values and purpose and meaning in life. And I could just see that there was something that wasn't being said. And so I probed and I probed. And essentially she ended up breaking down in tears and saying, I'm on this path that I felt like I always had to do because I was a young mom and I needed to have financial security for my child. But what I always really wanted to do was act. And I feel like I've maybe not taken advantage of my dream or given up on my dream, and that I'm settling. And she broke down. And I will tell you, at the result of the end of the engagement, she did end up leaving her job, and she pursued acting and does some great work with acting nonprofits. So she's not an on-screen actress, but is living in her purpose now, which really excited me. But what I saw there was a fear of failure, a fear of judgment, sometimes making choices because of other priorities at a different point of life. How can executive coaching provide the support and accountability that's needed to overcome these fears and help us when we want to make these meaningful career changes? Because we're living older and older. I saw a news article the other day, lifespan may even increase from what it is now with newer technology and medical innovations. So we have long lives to live, and we all deserve to live in that purpose. How do we get there and avoid that fear, Karina?
Yeah, this is a tough one because fear is our body's way of protecting ourselves from the unknown, right? And so I think the beauty of having a coach work through this is hopefully with a trustful coaching engagement, the individuals have a sense of safety to express these uncomfortable and difficult emotions like fear of failure and fear of judgment. And what I've seen happen is when in a coaching relationship, they are able to articulate that and look at it in front of them, it diminishes a little bit the power that the emotion has over them. It's like we externalize it and we talk about it and we understand where is this fear coming from. And there's less power, and that creates more space and energy for us to actually move forward and do something with it. What I often see is the fear of failure comes from the fact that we don't know what's on the other side of a bold, significant change. We don't know if it's going to work. We don't know if it's actually really what we want, or we're imagining it because it sounds like it's something we want to do. And so I think there are ways where we can convert some of that unknowns into more known things. Sometimes it doesn't have to be an abrupt jump from one career to another, right? So how can we make this dream come to life in maybe smaller, bite-sized, safer ways? So there's room to experiment. There's room to test things out. I always remember a story from a book that I read about somebody wanting to open up a restaurant. It was their dream. And so they did it from one day to the next. And they realized they just hated everything about it. They forgot what it was that inspired them. And it was not a positive experience overall. And so how can we experiment on, working with other people who have opened up restaurants before or have acted, like shadow them for a day or have more conversations with people who've done that. And the more the unknowns are converted to known things, the more comfortable and the less fearful we can be. You also talked about like fear of judgment from others. And I think no matter what we do, we will always face judgment, no matter what decision we take. But what I've reminded myself, having also made a bold move, is, well, whose opinions matter the most at the end of the day? And if I can focus on that and silence out the rest, then I feel more supported and more comfortable making these changes. But I tend to go with bite-sized, small, experimental. Let that inform your next steps rather than big drastic changes that just can feel so overwhelming. I hope that helps.
Yeah, that's very helpful. And what I always like to tell people as well is that when you start over, you're not starting from scratch,
Right.
because every experience that you have had to date is in some way preparing you, right? So you're taking that and to your point, Karina, and transferring that into the next opportunity. The way you approach it will be different. So there's also a lot of value in starting something new later in life, because you're just coming with so much more. And Jeannie, this is the last question I'll ask you before I see a couple audience questions. I want to get to these. Finding purpose in our work can have a ripple effect in other areas of life. So can you speak to the connection between finding your purpose in your profession and also what that might have done in terms of greater fulfillment in your personal life?
I will certainly say that when life at work is good, life at home is good. Vice versa in some ways too. But to your point earlier, Angelina, you mentioned we spend so much more time with work, be it with our colleagues in an office or sitting in front of a computer. So a lot of times it's when work is good, then everything else kind of aligns. I think I have been fortunate enough to understand generally my purpose and find things in my work to connect to that purpose, both in my work and then outside of work. And so there creates a balance there. No matter what, I know where I'm going, who I'm interacting with, they're a part of that with me. So I feel privileged in a lot of ways to be able to identify that and to have the opportunities in the work that I've done throughout my career to do that both internally and externally. I think there's so many things we now have access to in companies and even outside of companies, be it ERGs, other resource groups, wellness is, companies, particularly bigger companies, are throwing as many resources as they can at people, and it's up to us to take advantage of it. We can't expect it to be spoon-fed to us, but we have to go seek it out, because oftentimes it's there for us just to take advantage of it. And so I say get connected to those, but then outside of work, get connected to organizations, join a nonprofit. If you're interested in art, Angelina, you love art. You went to a museum and said, how can I get involved? Any company, any organization like that is open to volunteers. And so if you start volunteering, you never know what will come from that. So find purpose in the small everyday things, find purpose in your job, find purpose with companies and organizations outside of your job. And you never know where that takes you. I grew up dancing. How Angelina and I met was through pageants. And then pageants, I connected because she was in an organization that the nonprofit I worked for was connected to. And then she went out on her own. And I was like, what you're doing could help us here. And then it just kept going. And I watched her, she watched me, and we've maintained a connection. So while making those connections internally, externally, talking to people, making sure they know what you're saying and doing. And they'll find opportunities you may not have even thought of and say, hey, maybe you should try this. And you're like, oh, I was just thinking of something like that. So keep yourself open, back to curiosity, stay curious. And if you go in with as positive of a mindset as possible, you will reap so much more. If you go in closed, you're not going to reap anything. But you go in open and you never know what may come your way.
Absolutely. I'm hearing a multifaceted life is the way, and owning all the ways in which you're multifaceted. Okay, we have amazing questions, so I want to get to each of them, 3 at the moment. How can I go about speaking with my manager if I currently do not find purpose in my position, but I do enjoy the company I work at? Jeanne, thoughts?
How do you go? So go back to when you started. What was it about the role? What's changed? What's remained the same? What's changed about you and what's remained the same? Is there something you thought you were supposed to be doing that you ended up not being able to do? And if so, don't go in to complain, but go in with some actions. Like, I am interested in this and I've shown the ability to do it by doing X, Y, and Z, and showcase everything that you've done and how it connects to that particular piece of the work. Find folks you can trust and talk to, or maybe shadow someone if the opportunity is there in a space that is of more interest to you. I think it could go back to mentorship, sponsorship, all of those things. That's an entire different piece of it. But if you want to take control of you, it's like, do some reflecting. What is good? What's not so good? Like, write that pros and cons list, and what can be changed? What can you actually action? And go into that meeting with your manager with some sort of an action plan, but an open dialogue, because you want them to be a part of your process, not you just telling them what it is you're gonna do or you want to do, but open up a dialogue around, these are some of the things that I hope to do. Is it possible? Like, are there opportunities for me to incorporate this into my work, or maybe shadow someone, but also be open to the feedback that your manager may give you based on the conversation.
Excellent. Love that idea. That's how you get your manager's buy-in. And something else you can do is, if you notice an opportunity, pitch ways in which you can fill in that gap. Another question, are you able to discuss how the current economic and social climate impact our search for purpose in our careers?
I'll take a first stab, and I think it can feel sometimes like a heavy tension we're having to sort through for ourselves when we see how much more affected we are by things that are happening around us, around the world. And so I would go back to values in this case and recognize we might have the same core values throughout our lifetime, but some will take precedence over others in periods of time. So if this is an environment where you suddenly feel stability and security and just having a job is what's important for you right now, because you need energy and time and resources for other parts of your life, then do that, right? And just going in eyes wide open to say, this job is just a job. For others, it might be the current climate is pulling them closer to purpose, and it's opening up opportunities for them to offer part of their time to contribute to some meaningful change that they want. So I think it's going to affect people in different ways, but it's also a good moment for deep reflection to say, what are your priorities and what are your values for this moment in time, given how much affected we are by the climate around us.
Thank you. And then our last question, which I would love to hear your responses on, as I work in a 100% remote company. Can you speak more on finding purpose in a remote position?
So most of our team works in office, but then the larger, I would say, retail team, we're remote. Like, we aren't together. I think it's finding times, like set times to be on Zoom meetings with people, Teams meeting, whatever the system it is that you use. Be intentional about your connections with people at your workplace, so you don't feel so isolated. My husband used to work from home, solely work from home. And it got to a point where he's a very social person. And so I'm like, I don't know how you're going to do this, but hopefully it works out. And I would always encourage him, like, you don't have to, while you work from home, you don't have to work from home. Like, are there other places where you can at least be around other people who are doing some type of working from home as well? So it's not so isolating. But when it's connecting to your job, make the time, put the time on calendars like you would in office with someone, setting up the coffee chats. I have more virtual coffee chats than I do in-person coffee chats right now with folks. And then, are there ways of getting engaged with other or parts of the business, be it the resource groups or volunteer efforts, whatever it is? Try to make the time and space to connect, because that's a networking opportunity for you. So it's beyond just connecting, but what else could come from those, out of normal work hour connections? It goes a long way. It builds your network, and it keeps you connected to your employee base.
Yes, and I would also, oh, please, Karina.
Sorry, I was just going to add one other idea, which is sometimes we forget why we do our jobs because we're in our home offices. So even just having tangible reminders on your desktop or on your desk that tells you why you're doing what you're doing could really be helpful. It's simple, but it could be really impactful as well. So I just wanted to drop that in.
I love that tip, and that is a flag for me. Maybe I need to send some things to my team to keep that reminder at the forefront for them. Karina and Jeanne, I want to thank you both. I gained so much value from this conversation. And for me, conversations like these are a reminder of my purpose and why I do the work that I do. It's really important for us to find ways to support workplace culture and to create opportunities for employees to feel that community and connection with where they are spending a large majority of their lives. So I want to thank you both. I also want to thank the New York Urban League and Sandra Garcia for facilitating these spaces. Again, we've had 4 this year, and we're coming back next year, moving it up to 6. So we'll do one every other month. We have 3 different themes that we're focusing on: individual contributors, people managers, and then building collaboration amongst teams. So please look out for those topics and those calendar dates. And again, I wish you all an amazing rest of the year, and hope that you have an opportunity to do some reflecting on your purpose and use some of these great tools that both of our speakers gave to you today. So thanks, everyone.